we call the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it is great to finally see some backbenchers and members of government in the House to actually listen to the debate in relation to this important bill. It is of importance that not a single backbencher of government is speaking to defend this bill. All these members of parliament that go to their communities with a staunch commitment to Indigenous voices being heard and a staunch action on climate change are silent when their own government is introducing bad legislation. At a time where the world is reaching record temperatures and unprecedented levels of risk to climate-fueled disasters, Australia's most polluting industries cannot be permitted to carve out from climate or environmental legislation and make things worse. I wonder just how many members of the government are aware of the terms of this legislation. The Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Legislation Amendment, Safety and Other Measures Bill. It's those other measures that are the sneaky little input that has come in from the Minister for Resources. This bill provides an unacceptable carve-out for the offshore gas industry. It shows that the government, like the coalition, is completely captured by the gas industry. Australia is currently the world's largest exporter of LNG, exporting a record 80.9 million tonnes of LNG just in 2021. Gas is fast-tracking global warming, with methane 80 times more potent over its first 20 years in capturing heat. We do not need more gas, and the very thing we should be doing is holding the gas industry to higher scrutiny, to more environmental controls, not less, and certainly not a carve-out for the Minister for Resources, essentially being a Minister for Gas. The 2023 Climate of the Nation poll found a clear majority of Australians, 55%, support no approval of any new gas, coal or oil projects. Approving new gas projects is entirely at odds with our commitment to the Paris Agreement to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees and against the International Energy Association that states that we can have no more new oil and gas projects if we wish to achieve that goal. So how many members of government have gone to their communities with a commitment around global warming, a commitment for action, and yet today, on the Speaker's list for this legislation, not a peep, not a single person is willing to stand up to defend this terrible legislation. Since 2014, the offshore gas industry has circumvented the direct requirements of the EPBC Act due to changes that allowed approvals to be managed by National Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environmental Management Authority, NOPSEMA, with a proposal to streamline offshore petroleum and greenhouse gas activity environmental approvals in Australia. This green light approach to the industry was specifically flagged for reform by Graham Samuel in the Samuel Review of the EPBC Act and has been the subject of 2 recent federal court cases. The federal court cases confirm that consultation with First Nations people with a connection with the land is a requirement for NOPSEMA to accept environmental reports for offshore gas projects. But now, in the wake of those decisions, the government is presenting this current bill to essentially circumvent it. Today, we see a bill that seeks to further water down EPBC Act engagement with offshore gas and First Nations communities' consultation requirements for the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act, to be watered down even further. So a bill that, and if you listen, I'm sure many members in this place didn't listen particularly closely, but from the crossbench we did, listen to the second reading speech of the Minister, or indeed our face-to-face briefing, you would think there was nothing to see here, move along here, this legislation is all fine. But that bill does so much more than what was first obvious. It contains Part 2, Schedule 2, that appears to be a response to the federal court decisions that the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act requires First Nations people with a connection to land to be consulted with. So this bill now is a deliberate attempt to placate gas companies by amending the law that requires First Nations communities to be consulted. It is just quite incredible that in the same year, the same party of government who brought a referendum for First Nations voices to be heard, to now be the party who introduces legislation to circumvent those voices for communities is just quite outrageous. It's just quite incredible, really, Mr. Speaker, that we stand in this place. We know so many members campaign to their communities for First Nations people to be recognised in our Constitution through a voice to Parliament, to be heard, to be able to engage on legislation in a meaningful way. In Warringah, hundreds of volunteers, door-knock, campaigned, stood at the booth on the day for the referendum. I'm proud that my electorate, like many of my colleagues on the crossbench, voted yes. But when the referendum failed, together with many other Australians, we put to the government, we put it on notice, it must continue with its commitment to the Uluru Statement of the Heart, and especially it must listen and consult with First Nations people. So recognising that listening to First Nations people is not only through a legislated voice, but it is in practice. It's every day, through every piece of legislation and decision that matters. So it's quite outrageous now, when it doesn't suit the government's agenda, that it is seeking to circumvent that requirement, and it's doing it by stealth. It's hiding this dirty little section of this legislation to improve workers' rights. No one disputes workers' rights, and that has broad support. But what we've seen, and we've seen it too often by this government, is these sneaky little bits of additional legislation that come into play and that undermine any kind of goodwill or good work. The agenda for gas companies is clear. The government, in delivering the agenda of gas companies, is hiding grossly inadequate petroleum resource rent tax reform in a tax integrity bill. Now we're seeing this little sneaky amendment. This approach lacks integrity. It's playing politics. And I share Senator Pocock's views and so many here on the crossbench that it is really unbefitting of this government. And so I call on members of the government to speak up in this place, represent your communities, represent First Nations Australians, make sure those communities have a voice when it comes to these projects. There are many, many environmental concerns around this bill and around the current state of play. It's not only consultation with First Nations communities that the government and polluting gas industries are seeking to circumvent. It's also critical environmental laws. There are serious risks in regards to the application of the new environmental laws once the government's nature positive plan, which is currently under consultation, is enacted. Again, it seems incomprehensible. These are significant reforms that the government's words have, in their own words, have said they're outcomes-focused, decisions that are nature-positive, better partnerships with First Nations and conservation planning that targets resources to areas where they have the greatest impact. But while the government says all those things that sound so good, promises environmental reform that is well overdue, through this bill it is seeking to give carve-outs to the very industry that puts the environment at risk. It is giving a carve-out to the gas industry. It's effectively giving offshore gas a get-out-of-jail-free card to the gas industry and polluting projects, the very industry that needs the most scrutiny. Part 2, Schedule 2, it's really important that we understand why this is so important. We know we are facing a climate environmental crisis. We know this month we've got announcements around bleaching events of the Great Barrier Reef, the hottest water temperatures off the New South Wales coastline, globally the hottest year on record. The last 12 months have seen record ice deficits in Antarctica, fires ripped through Europe, late starts, weeks of non-existent snow. We've got record glacier melting. In Australia, we know we are on the front line of impacts. Climate change will impact all of our communities. 50% of the Australian population lives within 7 kilometres of our coastline. What do you think will happen when all of this really comes to pass, all those predictions of what will happen? So much of our communities will be exposed to flooding, to coastal erosion, to extreme weather events. How is anyone going to afford insurance in Australia? What is going to happen to the safety of so many communities? You cannot, on one hand, be concerned about that, but then give a get-out-of-jail-free card to the gas industry by providing only the Resource Minister the right to approve it without having to go via the Environment Minister and the EPBC Act. We know that there is so much risk ahead, and so it's incredibly important that we have proper scrutiny around offshore gas projects. These are putting everybody's endeavours at risk. All of the emissions reduction that people do personally, through their rooftop solar, through their actions, it all becomes for nothing if we keep on approving offshore gas projects. They must be put to the highest scrutiny under the EPBC Act. And unfortunately what we're seeing is none of that. Instead, we're seeing a carve-out. At a time where there is great risk that our emissions profile is even greater than what we think it is, there is highly likely that satellite data will reveal that Australia's emissions may be up to 60% higher than what we currently think because of methane. Now, just to stop and think about what that means, and in the meantime, even with that warning, clear warning bell for the Resource Minister, for the Minister for Climate Change, we have before us a legislation that seeks to carve out to an industry that is a major emissions producer with projects that risk our environment, a massive carve-out to ensure that they do not have that highest level of scrutiny. So it is just incredible. At the consideration in detail stage, I'll be moving an amendment with the support of the member for Goldstein and many here on the crossbench to try and improve this, but it is an absolutely shameful day for the Albanese government.